November of this year marks the 20th anniversary of BIONICLE Heroes, a very strange game. It was the last official retail BIONICLE game ever released, one of the few LEGO games to mostly include just LEGO Technic pieces, and the only LEGO title by TD Games to not feature the word LEGO in its title. It's also one of the LEGO games with the most active modding scene, whether it's basic quality of improvements, new characters, conversions, or even an entire character customizer. Though, while exploring all of these, one name kept coming up: Kralich. After launching the Raising the Bar Redux project for Half-Life 2 and becoming an editor and community manager for modding repository ModDB, Kralich would start making mods for BIONICLE Heroes, and fast forward to today, he's about to unveil something that'll change its modding scene forever. But before that, I thought it'd be interesting to retrace his entire modding career, from his early commissions of Star Wars Clone Troopers and Garry's Mod, to working in NVIDIA to bring ray tracing to Portal 2 and Half-Life 2, along with so many mods in between.
My name is David. Online I go by Kralich, and I'm the technical program manager of RTX Remix for NVIDIA. That's the official stuff, and then, you know, in my spare time I like modding games of all sorts, most pertinently here, BIONICLE Heroes.
What led you to starting to mod games?
So, kind of two answers here, right? So the fairly workman-like answer. When I was a teenager, I was playing Garry's Mod, as many teenagers were, some 12 years ago.
Of course.
And, you know, yeah. And, you know, I was playing Star Wars roleplay servers, right? We run around as a clone trooper and such. And, you know, on these servers, as is, you know, was kind of introduced by the Clone Wars TV show, everyone wanted to be their own clone trooper, near enough. But there weren't a lot of people making custom clone trooper skins on the Garry's Mod workshop at the time, only really one or two people. The majority of these were just straight ports from Jedi Academy 2. That's where the skins were coming from at the time. I wanted to set up some skins for myself and my friends, so I knew someone and they taught me how to do the basics on that. And then I did that for a bit. I made a couple of skins for various people who asked. Eventually someone asked me to make a skin and I didn't want to. I just didn't find it interesting and I said I'm alright. And they offered to pay me to do it, and suddenly switch flicked about, oh, this could be something. I've got like 550 workshop add-ons now. These aren't just Star Wars, but there's also some 40k in there, and just a whole range of other random things. I'd say I actually have some Lego Star Wars stuff in here, which was some of the last commissions I ever did. At a certain point, the time expenditure made sense when I was a teenager and didn't have a job, but as I became an adult and got a proper full-time job, this thing stopped really being worth the time. And so I kind of dropped it and focused on a few other things. But yeah, I mean, I did a lot of little silly things over the years. That's kind of loosely how that originally started, and that's how I got into Source Engine, which is my primary game engine of choice these days. But then in terms of why it appealed, you know, a lot of the games I played when I was a kid were kind of during that sort of golden age of modding, right? Where every game shipped with a level editor or some kind of other built-in modding tool. And we haven't seen that in a bit. It's coming back into vogue, I think, with things like the Creator Club from Fallout. And this is a big reason of why I've been personally very invested in Remix from NVIDIA, because it feels like a big company taking a swing on modding again, and you just don't see that much these days. But yeah, I mean, I guess it was growing up with that and being able to make those things happen. It was also BIONICLE. I've always been a creative sort, and I definitely think BIONICLE contributed to that. I was writing, you know, fan fictions about my BIONICLEs and all sorts, and making them, and the custom mocks and stuff. And I still make the mocks, not so much fan fiction these days, but the mocks, sure. And I mean, that's really the fundamental. I guess it married gaming, which I've always loved since I was a kid, and being able to be creative and make stuff in there. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the two ways I think I got started there.
Yeah, I definitely think that more and more companies are going to be pushing for user-generated content. GTA 6, I know it's going to be a big part of it. Battlefield 6 as well tried to do something like that, but I'm still kind of shocked at 550 workshop add-ons. That's a few.
Oh yeah, just a few. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I made a bit more than that. A lot of servers on Garry's Mod, they like to have like an exclusive thing, right? And so they host it like locally on their server or something. The exact details of how it worked always eluded me a bit, but I probably did about 100 more that were more or less private, you know, like I want a reskin that's just for me on my server or something. But yeah.
Interesting. Those would pretty much be your earliest mods?
I think so. I mean, technically, if we want to really get down to brass tacks, the first mod I'm ever credited on is a Minecraft mod from 2011 called Deathcraft, where I have the illustrious title of Ideas Guy. which is kind of humorous because I don't think there's a type of credit I hate more today. Now that I've actually done modding around the place than an ideas guy. But there you go.
Nice. Some of your early work was getting to work on Raising the Bar Redux for Half-Life 2. How'd you get involved in that project?
Well, I actually started it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I formed it myself. I form a lot of these groups, and it's basically because I don't know how familiar you are with Half-Life 2 modding specifically, but there's this whole group of cut content mods, right? This sort of thing. It's called the Half-Life 2 beta community. So named for the leak version of Half-Life 2 from 2003. People call it the beta. It's definitely not. It's more like an alpha or pre-alpha in the development phases. So it's a bit of a misnomer, but it's the name that's stuck over the years. It's just a community focused on documenting and recreating cut content for the game. And there's been a lot of these so-called beta mods over the years that have kind of made various stabs at recreating Half-Life 2 as it maybe could have been. And I was not a massive fan of any of them. Maybe the more pertinent problem, there's also this colloquialism in the community of the beta curse, which is that there is actually not a cut content mod, besides one parody joke mod, which we don't tend to count for this curse. There is no mod that has completed an end-to-end remake of the story. They all end up flopping somewhere in the middle. And I mean, it's a ton of work, right? You're basically asking a bunch of hobbyists to remake one of the most acclaimed games ever made. I kind of looked at this and I thought, maybe I could do this in all my hubris as an 18-year-old. But 8 years later, I mean, this thing's going strong. We're one of the 2 furthest along cut content mods in the community's history. And we've done it in less time than any cut content mod in this community's history. We've also got spin-offs. These are just, filling in other details of the universe, targeting some things like making like a Half-Life 2 deathmatch mod, which is as well, that's kind of like RTBR, but in the deathmatch context and that sort of thing. A lot of these have basically just been me thinking, what could we get away with regards to things like RTBR, and taking inspiration from other very accomplished modders, particularly on the spin-offs. I was inspired. Corey Loses, he's a big cheese behind stuff like Thrawn's Revenge for Star Wars Empire at War. Ooh. And that whole team who make the Star Wars Empire at War expanded mods like Revan's Revenge as well, and Galactic Civil War, I think that might be the name of that mod. They have a really great set of mods, and yeah, I mean, it kind of had me thinking like, hey, a mod team can make spin-offs? Is that really a thing? I was familiar with like mods of mods, but yeah, I mean, RTBR has kind of grown into a bit of a crazy beast. In lieu of not spending this whole interview talking about it alone, I think it's definitely been transformative for my life working on RTBR specifically. It's really continued to cultivate my interest in modding. Some of the people I've met there are really genuinely great friends. One of them is going to be my wedding photographer next year, and I've met a lot of these people now. I met one in Germany just last year at Gamescom because I went with work and he was going for fun. That was great fun. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I've gotten out of it, besides just that it's a very successful mod and I'm very proud of it, is the team and the people aspect. And I think it's the people that keep me coming back to modding. I think it's probably the biggest thing I learned from that mod, is just how many amazing creative people there are in this space, how much ingenuity is kind of displayed by the people in this space. I think that being one of my first mods that really hit it big, that had a really formative experience on where I now view modding today.
I think we can skip the question about your most memorable contribution because, I mean, you did create it, so...
Yeah, that's a pretty big one, now that I think about it.
A few years later, you actually became an editor and community manager for DBIONICLE, the company that owns and operates ModDB. How did that happen?
All my mods are hosted on ModDB, right? Besides the Steam Workshop ones. And I had just been using the site fairly regularly for a lot of years. 2021, I was coming out of university, looking for a job and everything. And originally I was looking at doing advertising writing. My degree was a writing degree, but very practical writing. So publishing non-fiction and that sort of thing. And that's because I've always felt that it's very hard to make a living out of a creative career. Some people definitely can do it, but I've always been a little bit practical and kind of like, I could just kind of work a job as long as I then got to go home and satisfy the creative passions, And so that's kind of where I was going. And then I just happened to see on ModDB that there was a job application for the editor of the site. And I thought, hey, I've been using this thing for going on 10 years already. Maybe I could take a stab at this, right? And apply. And yeah, I mean, I ended up more or less beating Scott, that's the CEO of ModDB, more or less beating him over the head with my modding experience and just kind of sending him a portfolio that was about 50 pages long of every mod I've ever made. I kind of was thinking on the strategy for this, and they always say make the portfolio short short, but I was thinking like, I want Scott to think I know what I'm talking about, and not only that, I'm prolific. I can engage with all these different modding communities and all these different people because I've been around the houses. And yeah, it ended up being the right approach. I ended up working there and succeeding in that interview. And yeah, one thing led to another, and I just stayed there for a good few years kind of doing this work around ModDB.
In 2020, you released your very first BIONICLE Heroes mod, Voya Nui, which mainly rebalances the game with tweaks to the playable characters, improved graphics, and bug fixes. What was your process for determining which improvements to include in the mod?
It's an interesting one, right? So I've done this a few times now, and so it's a little bit more familiar to me. But the first release of Myths of Voya Nui was my first time making a mod for a game that did not already have a serious modding scene for it, right? I mean, there wasn't no serious modding scene, there was no modding scene. There were no previously released mods at all. We're really just talking like some INI file tweaks from like PC Gaming Wiki and that sort of thing is basically being what we've got. And it was hard, yeah. It was kind of, what should a first mod for this game be like? What should a first mod for any game be like, right? I mean, you're trying to start something, right? You're trying to uncover a rock if you're deciding to do that. It was definitely a working process. I think I looked to the sort of definitive edition mods of games I've played in the past, right? Like patch packs and that sort of thing, and tried to kind of think like, okay, if you haven't played BIONICLE Heroes in 15 years or however long it had been at that point, I think 14 years when I released that mod. If you haven't played it in 14 years, what might bother you as an adult when you're playing the game, for nostalgia or otherwise? And so I played it all the way through, and as a BIONICLE fan, every time something bothered me, I fixed it. So there's characters that have inconsistent textures, like, you know, Voriki don't have the correct head textures and colors and that sort of thing, right? And there's some inconsistencies in the weapon models. There's, you know, characters who don't have the right colors. I kind of started there, right? And that ended up providing a ton of the work just to do into it visually, and I thought that was already pretty good. But I also didn't want it to be a purely visual mod, because then it would maybe be loosely written off as just kind of a skin. And whilst I not personally have anything against just reskin mods, they do tend to rate a little bit less interesting in people's heads. I was loosely trying to go for some form of coverage for this. I wanted to kind of get some people interested in the game again and in trying out the game again with all of this in mind. So I kind of went a little bit more widely, and then I started thinking about what bothers me in gameplay. And I guess the biggest thing is that the game is pretty easy, but you have to replay it a ton of times to get 100%. And not all of the Toa are equally fun to use in the original game. Not all the Paraka are equally interesting to use either. And yeah, I basically just landed on, okay, I need to make this game more fun. Let's make all the characters a little bit more powerful. Let's make them all a little more unique. And yeah, landed on the kind of edits that I did. Primarily focused at returning players who maybe don't want to have to play quite slowly as the game originally plays, you know, a few more times through. I think that ended up being the right direction. And then it kind of metastasized a tiny bit in that I found a very small handful of things which seemed a little bit incorrect or buggy in some way, and kind of thought about being able to tweak them. At the time, there wasn't a lot of availability for it, but that became more possible as years went on.
Compared to your recent work, how hard was it to work on the game for your very first mod?
There was a ton of reverse engineering that had to be done. I was not familiar with the kind of difficulty of that sort of thing. I mean, Source Engine is a bit of a fickle mistress, to be honest. You know, besides that, it is actually intended to be moddable, right? It's got an SDK and everything. The tools may be a little clunky, but they actually exist and they are largely functional. Now, you know, with BIONICLE Heroes, it was like when I wanted to make custom textures, I actually had to do hex editing and hex edit the individual bytes of the textures.
Oh no.
And so that meant, yeah, that meant the turnaround time on implementing a custom texture was about 10 minutes per texture. Which doesn't sound like too much, but I did about 50 retextures in that initial release of the mod, and I now do that many quite happily in a couple of days. But at the time, that was something I spread over a good 2 weeks or so, just because sitting down to do 5 or 6 at a go was like an hour-long commitment. You know, making the retextures was one thing, but that was usually the quickest part, and then having to put them in was boring looking at hex bytes. I had some help from friends at the time who were kind of helping me figure this stuff out, and whatever produced the workable results in game, I was pretty happy to push through, because yeah, this was an exciting frontier. I still think that it's been one of the most rewarding, because I've now made first-time mods for a few other games, but the thing is that BIONICLE Heroes is very close to my heart, and I really want to keep making stuff for this game so that other people who come back to it want to keep doing it. And so although there are still difficulties and things we have to reverse engineer, where we are now versus where we are when I started is crazy. We have a whole texturing GUI now that allows you to replace all the textures in the level at once if you want, and it's way faster, way better. And there's some very exciting stuff happening on that front, which maybe we'll talk about further down the line.
Do you miss the hex editing?
Do I miss the hex editing? Well, I don't miss the hex editing, but I guess there's a nostalgic thing of kind of like, yeah, I mean, it was rough. I always like a bit of rough and tumble in general. I like kind of being on the forefront of a problem and getting to solve it, and realizing that we'd cracked custom textures in BIONICLE Heroes after all these years and seemingly no one else had was very exciting. I feel fondly about having figured it out, but not about doing it, I guess is the right way to say it.
Myths of Voya Nui was notably your first appearance, if I'm not wrong, during a BIONICLE Direct as part of BIONICLE Day. If you're able to share, how is the process for like applying and presenting something as part of the event?
I don't remember the precise stuff I did at the time. I do remember what I do now. I don't know if that's still true from when it was back then, or if it's received tweaks. But the gist of it was that, you know, I have a fairly good working relationship with Vakti. He's one of the guys that runs the BIONICLE Day events. And him and I talk a little bit about what I'd like to plan each year. Him and I linked up last year, have done for this year as well. At that time, I think I was actually reached out to by one of the guys running the BIONICLE Day events. I think it was JSL Browning or James reached out to me, and he asked if maybe there could be some kind of feature there, and I said sure. At that time, I'd been taking a loose sabbatical from modding it. I'd kind of intended to do a bit more, but I ended up not doing further because there was just some other stuff I had to sort out at the time, what with work and university and that kind of thing. I didn't really have the opportunity to mod it a lot more, so this was kind of a great entry point to get back into modding the game seriously. There was a bit of a gap between the first release and this BIONICLE Day version, and it was just about thinking about something interesting that would come together. They asked for a video to feature as part of the BIONICLE Direct rather than just sort of a hey, it's out now sort of thing. So I got a couple of friends together, you know, who had kind of helped me with the BIONICLE modding up to that point. A friend who had helped work out sound formats that allowed for some early sound modding as well. And yeah, I mean, I submitted my trailer and all of that, and then since then the process has largely been the same, besides that this time I reach out to Vakti or James, and I just say, hey, I'd like to submit something, and they give me the deadline. I throw in a few trailers, and yeah, last year I ended up being on a stream with them for a bit, demonstrating the Build Your Toa tool. And yeah, I mean, I'm open to things. I love this community, and I love that BIONICLE Heroes has allowed me to play a more active role in it. And yeah, I mean, it's been really rewarding in that way since then.
Interesting, especially since I'm going to be going through the same process in a couple months from now. So
yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to talk to Vakti and help out with all of this. He always seems pretty happy to have some BIONICLE Heroes on there, and I mean, it is the 20th anniversary of the game, so I'm sure it would be something he might be interested in having a segment for.
Yeah, when there was the trailer, it was like, it's the 20th anniversary of this thing and that thing, and I was like, but it's also BIONICLE Heroes, so surely something like this could be interesting.
Oh yeah.
So, in the next few years, you made a ton of non-BIONICLE mods for games like Pathologic Classic HD, Warblade, 3D Ultra Lionel's Train Town Deluxe, and Battleship Forever. How do you choose which games to mod?
The connecting point here is these are all games I played when I was a kid, or as a teenager in the case of Pathologic. But the rest of these, yeah, I played them when I was a kid. And, you know, that's true of Cry of Fear mod I've made as well. True of the Portal as well, I played that when I was a kid, and of Nerf Arena Blast and Torchlight. That's really it. I mean, the thing is, when you're making one of these mods that is a first time mod for a game, you don't have any tools or anything. I learned this with BIONICLE Heroes, right? But I also learned this by doing these other mods for these other games. There's a lot of difficulty. There's a lot of rough edges to have to work with and reverse engineer these games, right? You kind of have to have some sort of motivator to actually push through. And, you know, the joy of creation is one, but if I just wanted that, I could go and mod a game that didn't suck to mod. So if you're going to push through, it's really about the experience of, I get to reinterpret this thing that I loved when I was a kid, right? And that helps you push through. That helps me learn new tools. It helps me kind of, you know, push through the harder periods of reverse engineering to kind of reach a conclusion. I mean, there are other games that I played when I was a kid that I've gone back and considered modding. There's some games which I probably just won't. They're just not compatible with the sort of mods I want to make and the sort of things I want to cultivate, you know. And then there's games which, like, I played as a kid which I'm thinking about modding, which I haven't gone around to yet. Like, there's this dumb bowling game I played when I was a kid did where you bowled in Roman temples and stuff, and it was called Kingpin. Sorry, it wasn't called Kingpin, it was called Hyperbowls. And the mod I want to make for it would be called Kingpin because, you know, it's a pun, right? It's one of those things where it's like, I got the name for the mod, I think I'd like to make it, but how do I make a mod for a bowling game is the question. But I've been sitting on for about 3 or 4 years as I've been thinking about doing this one. At some point, it'll probably happen. But yeah, I mean, there's been other ideas like this silly bowling thing that I have thought about making a mod for a game, and it just hasn't happened yet. And I guess there's only so much time available to mod, and my time to do that has been decreasing, not increasing, as I've gone older. But yeah, I mean, I have this massive master list, which I've shown to a few friends before, and they say it's quite frightening, of about 100 mods for various games that I have thought about making, where I'm basically thinking that all of them are fun enough in theory to make that I would enjoy making them. And you know, a lot of these are BIONICLE Heroes mods now that I look at this list, but you know, that's only because now we've done so much, I feel like I can do a lot with the game. And yeah, I think that's about the gist of it. It's very vibes based, I would say. I mean, there are some new games I've ended up learning through work these days, not that I've released like mods for and stuff. I now interface so directly with a lot of different modding communities and games through the remix stuff. Sometimes the best way to actually mod a game with remix is to go in and do some base level edits, and so that's required me to learn new tools for games quite a lot in the past. But again, you've got a really great extrinsic motivation there. I think that's generally what I suggest. I don't think there are many creatives who could literally just make in a vacuum with absolutely no reason and no fuel to that fire, right? There has to be something, I think, and in this case it was just wanted to look at these childhood things, and then yeah, professionally ends up being because I want to support a community.
Interesting. 2022 was by far your busiest year for BIONICLE content, starting with the release of Double Vision in April, which converts the game to look like a handheld title. Why though? What gave you that idea?
Well, I mean, have you played the DS version of BIONICLE Heroes?
A little bit. I'm not sure who decided to. Well, I mean, you don't really have the choice to use the D-pad for like looking around controls. It's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those clunky DS FPSs, no doubt about that. But I think the thing that I really like about it is it in a way that PC game does not. I feel like the DS game really nails the tone of BIONICLE, particularly with regards to like the music. It's kind of like BIONICLE Quake, right? When you play the DS version and the vibes and everything, it just seems so much more accurate to BIONICLE. I love the PC game. I have a lot of fondness for it, but I've kind of always felt like the DS game is actually better, quite meaningfully better. I think the gameplay is more fun. I think the levels are a little more interesting to actually play. It's also quite a bit harder. The PC game largely plays on autopilot, and I was saying Myths of Voya Nui was largely about trying to reduce the amount of time that you spend almost playing the game in that way to kind of make it a little bit more interesting to go through. But the DS version really feels like you have to engage with it. It's also a little vision of that sort of white whale of mine, which is the FPS build for BIONICLE Heroes, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of this sort of myth at this point of this whole build, which we had that footage from Game Hut, but which, you know, any attempts to find this build over the years have been largely unsuccessful. And the concept of a slightly darker take on it that was actually an FPS is definitely something I think has resonated with people. And yeah, in looking at what could be done to the PC version, as our, you know, capabilities with modding tools increased, and particularly with the texturing GUI, because again, when it took 10 minutes to do one custom texture, it wasn't exactly encouraging to have to do that a lot. And some of the ideas I had for this mod involved a lot of custom textures, and it would have been very hard work to do that originally. But yeah, I mean, as Myths of Voya Nui became a little bit more mature, I did think about maybe Double Vision should be something that exists. And yeah, we managed to get there with the 1.0 release, especially in the earlier days. But even now, I tried for every mod release that I did to, in some meaningful way, push the game forwards. And in this mod release at least, probably the big thing here was the custom Makuta player character over Vezonch, which used Verti's editing, which was the only way we could do custom models at the time. It wasn't the first mod to use Verti's editing, but it was the first total conversion mod for this game to use Verti's editing. I wanted to make that kind of a meaningful addition to what people see. Basically, all the updates it's had, and I have more updates planned for it, have been about bringing it closer and closer bit by bit to the vibes and the general style of the DS version, while still being, of course, within the PC version, because we can't make custom levels and enemies and stuff. Not yet, anyway. I'm sure that will be solved at some point.
Do you think that it's ever going to be possible possible to add in a first-person view to the game?
I think yes. There was some work that was done by a colleague of mine who's a great reverse engineer, a guy named Zozor4D. I wondered if it was possible to do like an RTX remix remaster of the game, and it wasn't possible technically at the time. He actually since made it possible, which is very cool. But the biggest thing he had to do there, and the biggest thing you have to do for these RTX remix mods, this is a little technical, but I'll try to keep it fairly straightforward. Remix basically has to hook into the game camera so that it knows what you're modifying near enough. And the game camera in a lot of games is kind of obfuscated. It's not very easy for the remix runtime to reach. And Zozor had to do some work on that particular functionality to make a remix mod possible for the game. In doing that, he has already proven that fairly strong ground level interactions with the original video game camera system is possible. Now, we haven't applied this in any other significant way. We haven't done anything crazy like introduce view models or anything. We don't have custom animations and like rigged model imports at the moment. Rigged being characters that have skeletons and are animated. We don't have any of this functionality at the moment. Again, I think it's probably sooner or later that we will have it, and then you could probably bring together all these pieces, and then yeah, maybe you could do a full-on first-person mod with full animations and everything.
Cool. So for Double Vision, the inspiration from the Nintendo DS version is clear, but was any inspiration taken from the Game Boy Advance version?
Of all the versions of this game, the GBA version is the one I'm least familiar with. I did not personally draw a lot of inspiration from it as a result, but there is actually a mod that exists out there. One of the other people who now help me run the BIONICLE Modding community, Vanadium, he's a massive fan of the GBA version of the game specifically. For him, it's kind of the de facto version in the way that for me the DS is the de facto version. And so in the same way that I kind of brought what I love about the DS version to the PC, Vanadium brought what he loves about the Game Boy Advance version to the PC, and he made a mod called Advanced Adventures. And this mod, it introduces a lot of HUD graphics inspired by the Game Boy version, all the Game Boy version's music, and he also made some small gameplay edits and stuff here and there as well. It's kind of a halfway house between Double Vision, which he used as the basis because it was closer to the Game Boy version than the original game, and then he kind of applied loads of other edits on top. And it is a really interesting play because like Double Vision, the game now feels and plays meaningfully different from the PC version, and that is a really interesting vibe for sure. Between that and Double Vision, we've kind of got the trifecta, right? Where we've got sort of PC game mods that are more like PC game, but we've also got Vanadium's mod for looking at the Game Boy Advance, and then Double Vision if you want to look a bit more like the DS stuff specifically.
Now we just need someone to port the PC version to DS or Game Boy Advance.
That's right.
Which I'm sure is going to be very easy.
Oh, very easy. Yeah, DS ROM hacks are notoriously easy to make, I heard.
Yeah, just rename the file extension. It's that simple.
Easy peasy.
So, you later created a mod that converts the Toa's color to McToran Colors with McToran flavor. What inspired you to do this?
So, I mean, by the time that McToran flavor was being made, BIONICLE Heroes modding was now, I would say, had begun to mature. So, I'm pretty sure Voriki Mode was already out by then. Yeah, and I think I consider when Voriki Mode came out to basically be the sort of maturity phase for BIONICLE Heroes modding, because we now had a custom character in the game, right? And that felt like the big hurdle to overcome to have a meaningfully different visually and playable character. And the thing is, up to that point, I had felt like every mod that I made or was involved in making for BIONICLE Heroes had to kind of be a bit of a big deal. Had to be the sort of thing that if someone saw on Reddit or something that someone might write about in a bit more detail. We wanted to always be trying to increase the reach of this community, and that was a pressure that I felt. With Voriki Mode out, I felt like we had been doing that for long enough that we could probably get away with some slightly more low stakes stuff from that point forwards. And I have a tradition with my lovely fiance now where we end up staying at Legoland Windsor a few times a year because we're big Lego fans as well. In 2022, we were just about coming up to our first stay in Legoland Windsor, and I kind of wanted to get into the Lego mood a little bit, and so I thought about I want to mod BIONICLE Heroes, but I don't have a ton of time to do this before we need to go, and I need to do a certain amount of readiness, right? And so with that in mind, I was like, I need to make something smaller. And I felt like, you know, I could get away with it now. And so I was kind of just drilling down on some ideas, and then something happened. What did I see? I feel like I saw a mock, or maybe it was just like a Stud.io model or something that someone had done where they took Jala and gave him the McToran colors. And I thought it looked super cool. I thought Inika Jala with the yellow Kanohi Calyx instead was a really great look. I thought like, oh, maybe we could make that into a mod. And I did Jala first, loved how it looked. And then I was like, okay, now it's time to do the rest, I think. And then, yeah, basically every time I've gone back to this mod has been when I've just wanted to do something fairly light touch, where, you know, I still want to push forwards with BIONICLE Heroes and make a release and do something cool for the community to check out. But at the same time, something that kind of doesn't require a ton of technical work. There's nothing in McToran flavor that is super technical. It's all using available tooling. No reverse engineering has been required for any of it. It's been quite a comfortable project to just kind of update now and then.
I also noticed that this one saw a rebrand last year for using the Tohunga word in the Maori language. The official BIONICLE game, LEGO BIONICLE Tales of the Tohunga, also saw a similar change several decades ago, being retitled to just Quest for the Toa prior to its release. Do you have any comments about why you decided to make this change?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up with the colloquialism for the McToran being the Tohunga, because that was kind of the early name for those guys. And, you know, I had understood that LEGO had a lawsuit from the Maori people at one time, and that was why a lot of names changed. But I kind of had always thought it was more of a intellectual property sort of thing. Not that a language isn't intellectual property in the same way, but more of a kind of LEGO was being a bit saucy, like co-opting the Maori culture a little bit, right? And I thought that was about the gist of it. It was just that, hey, there's a big company, it's making a ton of money off of a culture, and that culture, rightfully so, kind of wants to see a bit of dividend for how much their culture is adding to this company's bottom line. And so I thought that was about the gist of it, and that was an uninformed take, because I released the first version of Tohunga flavor, as it was called at the time, and I didn't get any comments about it. But in the next release or two that I posted on the BIONICLE Reddit, I did get a few comments from people who were saying that I should consider changing the name from Tohunga because it's actually offensive to Maori people. And I did some looking into it, but I wasn't really able to arrive at a really substantial conclusion. I think now it was just that I wasn't really looking for the right search terms. This kind of thing is not my forte, to be completely honest. And so I was willing to delegate out to people who were saying better, because I mean, it wasn't going to hurt if I thought of something, but I didn't really think of another name. And I thought this might have been loosely a legal protection thing, or maybe even a misinterpretation, because again, at the time, still under the assumption that it was actually a monetary reason that the Maori people did this lawsuit. Then the BIONICLE subreddit put out a post, and I follow that subreddit quite closely, that the word Tohunga would now be automatically filtered. And here they actually explained why, and the gist of it was that whilst Toa is a Maori word, it's actually used correctly in the context of it being like a warrior or something, right? Tohunga in the Maori language is a word for a kind of like an elder or it's a respected title, basically. And so the reason why it was offensive to Maori people specifically is because it was being applied to the childlike bumbling McToran. And with that in mind, suddenly, you know, it clicked. Like, oh, I understand why this is a problem. Totally. And the next release was McToran flavor. I left the old releases named Tohunga flavor because of the way that hyperlinks work on ModDB, and it would have broken a lot of things if I'd actually renamed them fully. But certainly every release from then on became McToran flavor, because, yeah, I mean, as long as I've been in the BIONICLE community, people have called these both the Tohunga and the McToran. It's still a completely fitting name, and even if there was not another fitting name, it would have been my responsibility as a creative and as an artist to be respectful to the human element at work here, and to have found another name that would work. So McToran was right there. I just used that instead, and no problems since then. And I think it's being much more respectful of the subject matter.
Speaking on the Voriki Mode, because you actually brought that up, that one was actually a team effort that you were part of, and it adds a lightning-based Toa. What exactly is the story behind this rumored 7th Toa?
Yeah, I mean, the tale of Voriki is one fraught with mystery and legend at this point. The general gist of it is that early in BIONICLE's lifespan, before the actual 7th Toa of Takanuva was revealed, there was this rumor, basically, about a 7th Toa that was floating about, and it was a fairly basic Photoshop of the Toa matter to be purple and to have a freaky looking face and everything. But I guess early 2000s internet and kids who weren't super internet literate yet took it as kind of being true, right? Spread it around, and yeah, that's kind of how we ended up where we were, with a lot of people spreading around Voriki and talking about him as a legit thing. And it ended up being that when we made the first character mod for BIONICLE Heroes, you know, this is primarily driven as a technical project by Hexadecimal Mantis, who was the primary reverse engineer in the community for most of its lifespan. You know, it was primarily a technical project to work all that stuff out, and screwing around making a Voriki thing was fun enough to give the motivation to push on with it. And then, yeah, at some point we kind of landed on, why don't we try to actually turn this into a releasable product that people could try out, and again, use as a great way to kind of promote how BIONICLE Heroes modding has come along and how people can get it, can engage with it and try some things out. And so yeah, that's how we landed on where we are with that one.
Interesting. I also saw that you assisted in adding some more recent BIONICLE sets to the game, like the Tahu mini build from the LEGO Classic 90 Years of Playset, as well as Tahu and Takua gift with purchase. How easy is it to make, you know, just change one character?
I mean, creating a custom character is sort of the bread and butter of a BIONICLE Heroes mod. A lot of our tooling is based around it, probably because it's my favorite type of mod to make is an individual character mod, and as a result, it's the thing I annoyed Hex the most about being able to do over the years. So a lot of our tooling is actually very well built for these kind of one-shots of making a character. We have great texturing tools, great specific modeling tools, and although these tools all have their own little bits of jank, as reverse engineered tools always do, when applied at the scale of only a single character and not say an entire Toa team, it's pretty doable. You're probably still looking at least a week to 2 weeks of work, and we split that work up among a couple of people to kind of make everything a little bit more manageable in a short time span. Because yeah, with GWP Tahu, again, we were kind of trying to capitalize on people being interested in BIONICLE right now because of the GWP, and the same was true of the 90 Years of Playset. With both of these, we really wanted to try and reach some people who might have been looking for BIONICLE at that specific time. And yeah, we I think it was both times it was very interesting to make. GWP Tahu was, I think, the first mod where we had a fully original head model. Was that true? Yes, that's right. I think this was the first mod to have a fully custom head and weapons models for it. And so yeah, GWP Tahu, much like Voriki Mode, kind of ended up being a natural expansion of the toolset available to the community.
Do you have any plans to add in the newly added Tahu minifigure from LEGO Minifigures Series 29, assuming you can find it?
Yeah, I mean, I've ended up giving up and grabbing a pre-order one from eBay, which hurts me a lot to have to do, but I also really want one of these things. So I guess it's like, it's either that or don't get one. I think it would be very cool. I guess the thing that makes it a little harder is the head is meant to look like a How anyway, right? And so it's like Tahu's face. And so it's harder to think of like, how could you stylize the character so that it's specifically that version? Certainly, I think it's interesting, maybe, to say that we have two mods making various versions of Tahu, but we don't actually have a Toa Matter mod yet. Definitely something that's on the horizon and is on my list of things I'd really like to make, is a mod that will replace the Anika with the Toa Matter, and then those with the Toa Nuva as well as a natural extension of that mod. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, this is a long-winded way of saying maybe, but I feel like before I make a third Tahu mod that's actually not the real Tahu, we should probably do the real Tahu. And then maybe come around to this one.
Yeah. You also assisted on Takanuva Returns, which adds the light Toa Takanuva. How similar was this project to Voriki Mode?
So it's loosely similar, but I think Takanuva is probably the most effort we've ever put into one mod as a collective community. There was a ton of work that went into making sure this thing was good. The original version of Voriki Mode was all using Vertiz editing in order to achieve its visuals. Takanuva, on the other hand, had a lot of original model work. I actually modeled and textured that Voki near enough from scratch, and the Coley staff model was textured from scratch and modified from the community BIONICLE.io packs, which is why we credit them in the credits there. But I mean, we tried very hard to market this thing, and that was because we kind of felt that, like, if anything is going to get some buzz going about BIONICLE Heroes modding, it would surely be Takanuva, right? There was a rumor around, again, the early internet days of BIONICLE Heroes that if you 100%ed the game, you would get to play as Takanuva. And I, you know, it was one of those classic kid urban legends, like new behind the truck and all of that. But I also believed this when I was a kid, and I never got to play as Takanuva. But it's very interesting because in the files for the game, there is a cut HUD icon for a playable Takanuva. Don't know if that was just a weird placeholder at some point or what, because, you know, there's a lot about this game's development we still don't know. But in that way, it felt very poetic that we should bring him back fully. And there wasn't a particular release or event we were doing this for. In hindsight, we probably should have done it for for Bionicle Day, but we were just kind of doing it. And I worked with a 3D artist and an animator that I know, Aiden, and she did a really great job animating the initial opening cinematic, which is pretty cool, right? The BIONICLE Heroes now has a custom cinematic. Then yeah, I had a voice actor friend come in and fill in for Takanuva. Originally, we were actually going to get the original voice actor for Takanuva here, and he was all for. But it's one of those unfortunate things. This is around the time that voice cloning with AI was becoming very popular, and a lot of voice actors were being advised to not do pro bono projects like this anymore, in the risk that their voice might be cloned for commercial use. That all is fully understandable. In the end, he kind of settled for giving us his blessing with the voice actor we had chosen to go with instead, and it was great to talk to him at any rate. So yeah, it ended up being quite different from Voriki in that it really felt like us trying to make a almost shipping quality custom character. Voriki is obviously a joke, right? But this was like, what if Takanuva had actually been in BIONICLE Heroes? And we were trying to take it very seriously. And I think it really comes out. He's a fully formed character in the game with all the right HUD icons and everything. And he feels artistically not too far off the characters you can play as in the game too. And yeah, I mean, the cinematic was just, I rewatch it now and then. It's just fantastic that we even have something like that for this game. I'm really thankful for that.
So back in 2023, you became a modding consultant for NVIDIA, acting as a link between the community and the company for Half-Life 2 RTX and Portal Prelude RTX. What work did you do under this role?
I started in 2022 doing some sort of voluntary hobbyist stuff. When RTX Remix was being announced and everything, I found the tool super cool. It really expanded the horizons of modding, I felt. It allows you to modify a lot of games that did not previously have great modding tools. And I think the big strength of it in particular is that the toolset Remix has is not specific to one game. Although there are some game-specific things you learn when making a remix mod, generally the actual remastering process is pretty similar from game to game, and that's not really true in mods as a general rule. Generally, you have to learn everything again every time you swap to a new game, so that's super appealing. For all the reasons, reverse engineering and learning new tools and etc. can be tough. Probably the toughest part of modding in general. So yeah, I was working at ModDB at the time when it was announced, and I was in the initial press pool because the product manager for Remix, a guy named Niall, he had headhunted basically some people from the bigger modding sites at the time. So there was also Nexus Mods people in that call, for instance. And we were basically modding press, more or less. And the questions which Nexus were asking were very good, but very practical questions. How much you could do with the tool and what their kind of access periods would be like and what examples have already been made and that sort of thing. And so after that call, this being, September of 22 or thereabouts, Niall reached out to me privately and kind of said, you strike me as you might actually be a modder that makes mods because of the kind of questions you were asking. And I said, yes, I'm primarily a modder. I kind of have ended up accidentally being press at ModDB. And so we had a lot of really great long calls. He had an intense desire to just learn a lot more about how best to support a modding community. He understood that what NVIDIA wanted to do there was something that hadn't been done by a big company in a while, and certainly at the scale of what Remix allows for a mod of this type. He was going around the houses, but he kind of ended up keep on coming back to me and to talk to me about things. I had a great top level view. I got to talk to so many different modding communities, and as a result I had a really good picture already of like the kinds of games that would benefit. We kind of got to talking, and he said he'd like to allow me to be one of the first people outside of NVIDIA to actually use the tool straight up, and did I have any ideas for what I'd like to do with it. He wanted us to kind of have a poke at making a new remix mod after Portal RTX had come out and looked fantastic, and I said that maybe the most economical use of time was to remaster another Portal mod, because all the work for Portal RTX had already been done. It was going to be quite efficient, therefore, to basically start with a mod that was already about 80 to 90% remastered, and then you just remaster the unique assets to that mod. The first mod that came to mind for me was Portal Prelude. It's one of the most famous Portal mods of all time, one of the first mods I ever played as a kid, and we spoke to and got on board the original creator after all these years, and he and I worked together between September 22 to the summer of 23. And as Prelude was beginning to wrap up, Niall was saying to me that, hey, could we target something bigger? What about Half-Life 2? What about taking a really big swing? And I said I'd love to, but I couldn't do that on a hobbyist basis. I just wouldn't have the time. So we talked about making it official, and then we did. And so I was contracting for them for a few years, up to 2024, late 24, kind of working on Half-Life 2 and getting familiar with people. And then it eventually led to to becoming full-time in late 24 and through to 25 and now, yeah. And still work with Remix, still work with Half-Life 2. And these have been really, really great things. Like I say, you don't see big companies all the time trying to get engaged with the community in this way and trying to make open source projects that are just kind of designed to allow people to create things. And I really appreciate that I kind of just jumped from doing one thing I love, which is ModDB editorial and all that, to another thing I love, which is now making these mods with other communities.
Nice. I also saw at the same time that you were releasing mods adding ray tracing support for Nerf Blast Arena and Torchlight. Was this done for NVIDIA or separately?
So like the role I serve at NVIDIA is not like super concrete. So once I became full-time, I got a concrete job title and everything. But up until that point, I was just under the remit of a modding consultant, which basically meant I do whatever makes sense. And even now, I think everyone has agreed that rather than me being in one bucket, it probably makes sense to just allow me to sort of bounce around wherever is needed. And that's how I like to work anyway. So one of those ways is just that because I can kind of complete a mod from end to end, because I have good knowledge of every step of the mod process, I was looking in a couple years ago at trying to set up a few more kind of example remix mods for the community. Not of like some super massive games, but just a few passion projects, right? But again, both Torchlight and Nerf being games I played when I was a kid. The idea was I did this a little bit on my paid time. I did it a lot on my unpaid time though, because I just love working with this tool. And yeah, it was just to kind of demonstrate to people the sorts of things you could make with Remix. I felt like people were getting a little bit stuck in the source of, oh man, I have to remaster this whole game. If I'm going to remaster, I don't know, Deus Ex, the first one, I'm going to have to do a whole massive game. And how am I going to do that? And how much time is that going to take and how much work and yada yada. And in general, I see in modding that people don't compartmentalize as much as they should. Mods are way easier to make once you stop thinking of them as one massive beast that has to somehow reach the finish line. And once you start kind of breaking them down into incremental deliverables instead. And you know, I'm like, you know, do chapter demos, right, for your mods. Do small updates and small patches and feel comfortable doing these things. Don't feel like everything has to be one big blowout at the end and it's all on that, you know? Games companies are kind of forced to have to do that sort of thing. They can't always ship content incrementally. At least initially, they have to release something pretty major right out the gate. Modders don't have to do that. Modders can just ship whatever, whenever, cultivate communities, cultivate a team. So yeah, these two things were kind of to demonstrate that. They weren't done by NVIDIA in the official sense. I guess I did them for the benefit of NVIDIA loosely because I wanted to encourage people to be making mods. But I don't know, I've made a lot of example mods and I think just the principle of the thing is, yeah, just to encourage people to try out something different was the idea.
Interesting. Do you plan on making more of these RTX mods?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple more going at any given time. Broadly, everything I do is technically under NDA, so I can't talk super specifically, but I have ideas for these sorts of things going at any given time. It's just about thinking where's the most valuable use of my time at the moment. And since I made these two mods, the Remix community has become a fair bit better at just kind of pushing out their own releases. It's not necessarily as important, it feels like, anymore for me to have to do a demonstration there. I have actually been working on updating my Nerf Arena Blast mod specifically. There's some screenshots I have been posting on the public RTX Remix Discord. That one's more of a passion project now. I don't really work on it for work at all. I'm just kind of pushing ahead with some interesting stuff on that one to get it out the door. And that one I think will probably make a full release at some point in the future, eventually. But as for other vertical slices, it'll depend. I'm sure at some point something else will come out, even if it's in a more official capacity like Half-Life 2 or something. But yeah, I mean, I'm always going to be on top of this space doing interesting things, so something will come out eventually for sure.
So any chance of a BIONICLE Heroes RTX?
Well, it's funny that you say that because I have actually explored that possibility and it's technically doable. So I mean, you know, when I was looking at what could I do to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the game, naturally a full-blown remaster did come to mind. At the time, we did not have modding tools that were capable of doing that in the game itself. Technically, we actually now sort of do, but yeah, at the time we didn't have that capability. And I worked with a very talented reverse engineer to kind of get BIONICLE Heroes functional with Remix. The thing is just that there was a ton of work that needs to be done to just get the game looking pretty good, because the one kind of hurdle that I see a lot of Remix modders run into is they kind of show the mod too early. It's kind of paradoxical, but there's a brief period of time at the very start of a Remix mod project where the game usually starts off looking a tiny bit worse than the original, mainly because the original game was using all sorts of hacks and tricks RTX for a rasterized rendering model, and Remix puts that all into realism, and so a lot of those hacks don't work anymore. And so there's a fundamental level of work you have to do before the Remix mod starts looking a little bit better than the original, and that's when you can start doing really crazy stuff with like PBR textures and super high poly models and everything to actually make it look like really smash it out the park. That early pre-production period, that's a period of time where the most amount of care has to be taken to make sure that you don't end up revealing something. Like a proof of concept that doesn't look better is not going to win over anyone. So I kind of evaluated the amount of work that had to be done, and it was more work than I could safely put into it this year. I do want to do it. I did actually start some groundwork on it, and I do have a build that works and everything and is fully path traced, but it's just that I also think that we haven't done everything we could do with just the original game yet, and I wonder if jumping straight to a remaster would kind of prematurely nip some of that in the bud, because I'd be remastering the original game, not like the Takanuva mod or Myths of Voya Nui or something, and there'd be a real case to be made that any theoretical remaster mod should also try to be semi-compatible with all the other bevy of incredible mods we've made over the years. So yeah, there's a lot to work out there, and I unfortunately don't really have time to work that out this year. That all being said, I do have another idea that we're pursuing for the 20th anniversary that we can talk about in a bit if there's room for it. But yeah, I mean, BIONICLE Heroes RTX, definitely not dead, technically even works. I only have a few kind of proof of concept screenshots, and they're not like super pretty. They're more like, hey, this technically works screenshots. Not the sort of thing I'd want to put out until I felt like people would see it and their imaginations would light up. And yeah, some time away from that, but you know, I'll get there, I think.
Well, I wish you the best of luck on getting that working.
Thank you.
So, 2025 also marked the release of 3 of your mods for BIONICLE Heroes. Firstly, Hordika Heroes and Okoto Heroes, which respectively replaced the Toa with their counterparts from the 2005 storyline and the 2015 revival. What inspired you to create these?
The simple answer is that 2025 was the 20th anniversary of the Hordika and the 10th anniversary of the Okoto. We wanted to make a really big splash for Bionicle Day one of these years so that we could increase people's awareness of the game, and this seemed like a good way to do it. And so I worked with Shadow and Vanadium primarily. They're 2 of the folks who are now helping me run the BIONICLE Heroes modding community. Also worked with a few other folks from around that Discord to kind of make these 2 mods come about. And yeah, they totally convert the playable Toa into the Hordika and the Okoto respectively. All the music and cinematics and graphics and everything have all been tweaked to be more similar to those 2 Toa teams. And they were a lot more work to do than an individual character, because it was like 6 character mods in one to make the unique Toa team each time, but it was very rewarding. We did some really interesting stuff. The Hordika guys were a mixture of models from the Community.io pack and actually from cut content from BIONICLE Heroes. There's a bunch of unused weapon models in the game for like the Takanuva and the Toa Hordika and stuff, and we used these as the basis for a lot of those remodels. And then for the Okoto guys, we actually ripped out and modified the files and models and stuff from the iOS BIONICLE games from 2015. We were able to grab all that content and then kind of retooled it for use in BIONICLE Heroes, and that's how we landed on the models and general textures and stuff from those custom models in Okoto Heroes.
It's really funny just having all these different sources that you're grabbing these files from as a reference.
Oh yeah, I mean it's very helpful that BIONICLE's so multimedia. There's a lot to dig around with.
So that same year, you also released Build Your Toa, a character customizer that allows you to mix and match both vanilla and modded parts to create custom Toa. How complicated was it to create this?
So the core reason that I wanted to make this tool is because one of the big complaints about BIONICLE Heroes, particularly to its contemporary in you know, the Lego Star Wars Complete Saga, is that there's no character customizer. Now, there's only 13 characters in the game with the 7 Paraka and the 6 Toa, but if you consider all the different heads and compatible body textures and stuff, there's still quite a lot that could have been done with the vanilla game at least, or even to create extra parts just for that customizer. By the time we reached 2025, you know, we had now exceeded that amount of parts and body textures to be, yeah, really significant across all the custom character mods and everything. So the first thing was trying to work out the scalability. I wanted this tool to be relatively light so that downloading it wasn't a real pain, and I wanted, you know, using the tool to actually make your custom Toa to not be too hard either, assuming that most people using this tool probably wouldn't even know that BIONICLE Heroes was in fact moddable, let alone had a character customizer in it. And yeah, I mean, the tool tool was coded a variety of ways. I'm kind of a light touch programmer. I've done some Lua and some C++ in the past. I went back and forth with some, as a lot of people do with programming these days, a lot of AI help with like Gemini and ChatGPT. These things really help make tools like this more accessible, particularly because we don't really have a lot of active programmers in the scene anymore. Hexadecimal Mantis, who was definitely the don in this department for a very long time, had to dip out because of a non-compete from work, sadly, and said he wasn't allowed to make mods anymore, and that was a big problem for us in making these sorts of things. But my understanding of the coding is enough that with a little bit of AI help, we can actually go all the way and make these things. AI has never touched any of the creative aspects of this work. I've always kind of been of the opinion, and I know a lot of the engineers I work with are too, that programming is kind of like maths. It's very deterministic. It's one of those things where I've never really had a problem with using AI to kind of bridge the gap there in the same way that I would use a calculator to bridge the gap with mathematics. And yeah, that's how Build Your Toa came into being. It wasn't watertight. AI has a habit of, you know, making shit up and saying, I've definitely done what you asked for, and definitely not doing what I asked for. Enough bullying and the AI will eventually actually produce what you're looking for. And our success rate has increased with this a lot. We've done things like actually set up specific teaching skills for AI agents now. The hot thing, which you might have seen in the news or whatever, is stuff like Claude and Codex for doing coding at greater scale. And with these things, you can actually create a skill for them. It's basically a reproducible set of instructions that it looks to every time. Greatly reduces the amount of that's definitely not what I asked for. And that's partly how we've been able to really blow open reverse engineering BIONICLE Heroes, iterating on these skill sets and using a combination of our own experience and our own testing knowledge of how to work with the game. Because the other thing is the AI is not very good in a vacuum. If you kind of just dump it in front of something, it doesn't really know what to do with it. The amount of work we've done documenting this game over the years is really the only reason we've been able to actually properly leverage the tools available now. And yeah, I think there's still a very bright future ahead of us for actually pushing ahead and further with this game than anyone would have thought possible because of this.
Interesting. So the whole like giving them skills, does that help reduce the amount of bullying you have to do for them to work properly?
It reduces it a little bit. Sometimes you realize that they're not actually reading the skill because they're doing work you've already been over with them. Like, I mean, yeah, like that's the other thing. They can only really work with what you tell them. They can do a certain amount of investigation themselves, but particularly with reverse engineering, these things are largely at the mercy of human experience and testing to actually drive a good result. And in that way, you do kind of still have to watch it. It's not completely brainless work. There's still a human really required in the loop to make it function. And I think generally the failing of people who kind of just say, oh, we don't need a human for this anymore because an AI could do it, is failing to understand. But the reason why the best results can actually be accomplished with AI coding agents specifically is because there's a human in the loop at a practical level. And like I say, we don't use any of these tools for any creative uses, only for enabling more tools to use them creatively. We've never generated a texture. We never will generate a texture, at least I certainly won't. For me, that's the fun part. The fun part is the making of the art, and the tools are the bread and butter of getting there. It's one of those things where if we had a human programmer in this community who was super invested in pushing ahead on these tools and was available to do so, I wouldn't be using the AI at all. I'm kind of the opinion that the more humans in the loop, the better. It's one of those things where it allows us to kind of make some progress in the meantime, and in continuing to make mods for this game and to promote it to the wider community, I'm hoping someone gets excited by the prospect of what could be done, and we can just kind of say, hey, here's all the stuff we learned in the meantime, and we can put these tools to the side and let human ingenuity do the rest, as it should.
Yeah, hopefully you end up finding a programmer. Do you think that you'll be able to use Build Your Toa for making mods?
Yeah, I mean, it should be fully doable. I haven't actually seen anyone do it yet, but demonstrably you could make a custom Toa entirely using Build Your Toa. I did a couple of fun examples for Bionicle Day last year. One example is we have a couple of like various gold Toa parts from not only Takanuva, but there's a silly little mod I made once as a test called Sunny Harley, which just makes Harley's head be like a giant sun that's golden, and the textures for her body golden too. And when you pair up the textures and the heads for these two mods, you can basically make a couple of different Toas of light, strictly speaking. I guess it's one of those things where, like, at least for me, I would probably not use it to make a custom character mod because there's so much work we'd have to do from new. I'd have to make the heads in the first place in a compatible BIONICLE Heroes format before Build Your Toa could be used to then make that into a character. But totally for people who aren't as deeply familiar with modding the game, yeah, it would be a great entry place, and that's kind of partly what I was hoping to target with it, was people feeling like they could do something custom with this game without being being super informed on like all the ins and outs of how to mod the game. Like I say, these kinds of games that aren't designed to have mods very rarely are like user-friendly to mod, and that's probably the reason why this game still has a very small modding scene. Over time, we've been trying to make it easier to do that, and Build Your Toa is one of those ways.
Cool. Always love to see modding become more accessible, especially for more obscure games like this. So just a few weeks ago from when we're recording this, you teased an update to the Voya Nui mod that would allow you to switch between Vezon, the final boss of the game, and the Paraka, which normally aren't accessible after beating the final boss. What inspired you to add this functionality?
This is another one of those things, it's like a big criticism of BIONICLE Heroes, is when you beat the game, that's it. It just locks off 6 of the playable characters. And for a game that only has 13 playable characters, that's not great. And this was one of the first things that we really tried to do with these coding agents. The idea just being that we want to solve fundamental problems with the game. We want to make this game more fun to play for everyone, including ourselves. And the short amount of time you really get to spend with the regional Paraka in this game is really criminal. That's really the main motivation behind that.
Yeah, because if you're doing the typical stuff, which is just beating the entire story and then going back in free play with all the characters, you just never get to actually play as the Paraka unless you happen to know that you can't do the boss fight until you're ready to get rid of the Paraka. It's a very weird decision.
Yeah, very, very weird. But there's a lot of weird decisions with BIONICLE Heroes. One of those things of like, I think the game was clearly kind of rushed to get to that end point when they realized they were going to have to change over from the FPS model. It's so clear that a lot of things in the game were designed around that, and that when they had that mandate, they had to reshape how they were making the game.
During the BIONICLE Direct, which aired earlier, you got to reveal your latest projects, the 3.0 update to Voya Nui, as well as a modding SDK for BIONICLE Heroes. Could you share some more details about their development?
That's right. So I mean, deciding where the version number goes for these kinds of mods is always quite hard work, and figuring out what makes Voya Nui a 3.0 rather than say a 2.3, seeing as the last released version was a 2.2. But my general logic has been that when Voya Nui does something very new for the game that meaningfully changes how people are going to play the game going forward, and meaningfully changes the technology being used to mod the game, that's when I up the version number. So for 2.0, the version number escalation was the use of Verti's editing. I'm pretty sure this was giving Vezon his cape at last for a little bit of hacky work with the Paraka spines. And for 3.0 of Voya Nui, I had kind of always pictured it as being using custom models in some way to fix graphical issues in the original game. And this is still true in this version of Voya Nui, but perhaps the bigger thing is that through the coding agents I've talked about before, we've blown the plugin scene wide open for BIONICLE Heroes. So not only does Voya Nui have the Paraka switch plugin that will allow you to swap between the regional Paraka and Vezon in any level once you've unlocked the pair of them, we've also got plugins that will allow you to use more constructions as more Toa, specifically either for flavor in a few cases, just to use the Toa a little bit more rather than just Huki, or sometimes for gameplay convenience. Like there's a lot of vehicles in the game which are still only usable by Huki for some reason, even though anyone ought to be able to get into a boat, I think. It's so simple, but that kind of functionality was hard-coded and had to have been done with a plugin, and that's something that was doable in Voya Nui 3.0. The last plugin I really decided to implement that I think has a fairly meaningful impact on the game is one that makes it so that Huki can't torture Varahi anymore, because I've always thought that's a bit weird too. It's like, why have a Toa torturing these poor aphids that are just knocking about, you know? So that's now Paraka only, and that seems a lot more fitting than the Toa doing it.
Yeah.
There's one which isn't really a gameplay impact, but does have far-reaching consequences for the game. Consequences may sound like a bad thing. It's a good thing, really. We've been very limited by the amount of music we can actually put into BIONICLE Heroes. Now, Voya Nui, you wouldn't have thought would have had this problem being a vanilla-adjacent mod, but there's a unused water combat track, which is in the demo versions of the game, which is a more intense version of the Water 1 ambient track. The actual water combat track that ends up being used is a more intense version of the medium ambience tracks used in the second level of the water region. And I've always wanted to put this in the game to actually add a little bit of musical variety and ambient kind of musical consistency in these levels. But there's a limit to the amount of music you can actually put in, and this was hard-coded as well. We had a really crazy hack in mind that would have technically allowed for it, but would have broken the hub music as a result if you stayed in the hub long enough. And it would have been one of those, well, in modding we allow for these kinds of weird things, right, in exchange for progress. But yeah, we now have a new plugin, which is going to be part of the SDK that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And this this plugin will allow you to implement as much custom music as you like. You could have every level have its own custom music and custom combat music if you wanted. You could give all the Rakshi their own boss themes instead of having the same, all the Dark Hunters or whatever.
Nice.
And Vanadium, one of the people who helped me run this community, he's kind of the biggest guy in our group for music mods. He's made a lot of music mods, like Sonic music mods and that kind of thing. He's always found the limitations really annoying to work with. I know he's very excited to put some really cool stuff into action here. So yeah, I mean, with all those plugins, it felt pretty right to move Myths of Voya Nui up to a 3.0. But I almost feel like Myths of Voya Nui's 3.0, as much as it pains me to say, is probably not the biggest news that we feel like we're putting out. The biggest news we're putting out is actually the modding SDK. So BIONICLE Heroes was not a game designed to be modded. Games that are designed to be modded very often come with their own modding tools and SDKs. An SDK stands for a source development kit, and it's so that people can download it and get right down to business, you know, modding a game and stuff. Like the Source SDK for Valve's Source Engine, which is funny because that means the Source SDK is Source Development Kit. But yeah, it comes with all the tools you need, game configuration setups and everything, and BIONICLE Heroes just doesn't have that. All of our tools were running on various versions of Python, which meant that sometimes you had to have multiple Python environments going just to be able to run our tools, and that's even going with the fact that most people's computers don't actually have Python by default. Now, that's kind of a developer thing.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of blockers to anyone even modding this game, despite it being, once you have all the tools working, quite easy actually, because our tools are pretty powerful and have already been designed for a decent amount of usability. This SDK changes all of that. So all the tools now are C++. This means that they'll work on Windows machines without issue. Technically, it reduces compatibility on Linux, but I think with how few people are modding this game, Linux compatibility is probably not going to be a problem. And you could also run it with Proton even so if you really wanted to mod the game, but we're on Linux, so there's no problem there. And I mean, hey, if suddenly a million Linux modders come out of the woodwork after this SDK comes out, I'd be 100% happy to figure something out for them, you know, 100%. At least for this initial release, it's C++, so it'll be fully functional on Windows. It's one unified tool that has all of our tools in it. You can navigate all of them. You can set a game configuration like the source engine and load that game configuration every time that it starts you in your work folder and everything. I have actually started using this SDK myself because even though I've got everything set up and I'm used to using all the individual tools, the SDK just makes it simpler. It just makes it easier by every count. These tools are all also getting way more powerful for this version of the SDK. Previously, the texture editor could not implement higher resolution textures, so you couldn't really do a soft remaster of the game, not just the RTX remix thing, but like you couldn't make like a 2K texture pack or something for the original game. You were limited to the original texture sizes, and that's now a limit that we've crossed and been able to solve. We've actually got some limited material editing so that if you're modifying an original game model that didn't have, say, normal map or specular support, you can actually make it inherit the material settings of a model that does, and then you can implement your own normal and specular maps. So technically, you could actually do a remaster mod that ups the graphical quality of the whole game. And then, of course, we've got the new tool that will allow you to modify any sound file in the game completely losslessly. This was also a relatively new innovation. Previously, any edits we did were limited to music or a very small selection of the game's sound effects, and now they're all fair game. And yeah, there's still more we plan to add to the SDK in the future. As we develop more plugins and more EXE patches, we'll add to those lists. You know, right now we ship every plugin that currently exists, and you have an option to add as many of them as you like to your mods. Some plugins are incompatible, but there is built-in support in the SDK to actually tell you what plugins won't work with each other so that you can't accidentally break your game, which is very important to do. And yeah, I mean, there is just a ton of accessibility improvements that have been made with this SDK, and we will continue to make as we develop more tools and more ways to mod the game. I envision that at some point, modding this game will be like modding the source engine, where you'll just be able to create plugins that modify core game functions, modify textures, import custom models. The white whale we have, I guess, is at some point we'd like to be able to create custom levels so that a full total conversion, maybe of the Toa Mari, maybe of a different Toa team altogether, a full total campaign conversion would be doable. We're not there yet, but we've come so far in these years that we've been running this community. I feel like it's just a matter of time.
That sounds awesome. So beyond improvements to the SDK and the other stuff that we've talked about, do you have any other mods, BIONICLE or not, that you'd like to tease?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, we really should get around to putting the Toa Matter into BIONICLE Heroes. That would be good. That's probably the next big Toa team mod I'd like to do. We do actually have a unreleased Metro Heroes mod. It's probably going to end up being released by the time of this BIONICLE Direct, probably as part of the Direct. point, but we would like to revisit some other Toa teams as well and get the Toa matter in there. And then, yeah, I mean, there's kind of just unlimited potential with the tools at this point. You could make every canon Bionicle character playable to the same degree as Takanuva. You could do all the Toa Mari, you could do the Baraki, you could make a playable Axon, which we haven't done yet. And there is a lot of interest in the community to just kind of see like every Bionicle character playable. As each of these characters becomes playable, we could add them to Build Your Toa, and then Build Your Toa becomes a lot more powerful and a lot more capable as a tool. We're building that into the SDK as well, so that people can just start making custom Toa right away. But besides that, and besides BIONICLE Heroes, probably the main thing on my mind right now is I'm working on a new source engine mod. I'd like to make total conversions separate from Raising the Bar Redux. These are kind of more like small artistic explorations of a particular art style in a vibe. I previously did one that was like a 1920s detective getting thrown through time, the Burton equation. And I did another one that was like Scorn, but in Half-Life 2, so very HR Giga and biopunk, and that one's Gregulation. This other one I'm working on is based off of the Frutiger Aero art style. It's going to be very kind of gleaming and futuristic. I'm actually composing the music for this one myself. I have composed in the past, but not at this scale, so I've learned a ton about composing good music with FL Studio and that sort of thing. And yeah, we're doing a lot of exciting things with this particular mod. It going into this family of stylized mods, and a lot of the same people who work on those mods with me are people I work with on other mods around the place. A lot of them are people from Raising the Bar Redux. In fact, some of those people actually helped me get going with the BIONICLE Heroes modding community. It's very much a kind of shared family of work for me, where I see a lot of the same people. We work on a lot of different things together. It's a big creative enterprise.
It's a bit funny because at the start of the interview, you mentioned having to use a hex editor to just do the smallest of changes, and now you're building an entire SDK that's going to make modding way simpler than that. And that connects to my next question, which is that you say in your Discord bio that you're building a modding empire. What do you mean by this, and where do you see this empire in a few years down the line?
Yeah, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. I kind of see it as we're in the middle of a bit of a modding renaissance, where there was a period of time where modding games was not very easy. Studios were not putting out great SDKs for their games, and with stuff like Remix from NVIDIA, but also Bethesda has always been fairly good at supporting modding communities, and the new Doom games have really great SDKs now, like Doom Eternal has a fantastic SDK. We see increasingly that studios are realizing user-generated content is a untapped well, and whilst there will be monetary reasons for that, and not all of these reasons are noble from these companies, as a modder who's spent a significant period of time just trying really hard to be recognized at all, and knowing how many other modders I worked with were trying to be recognized, seeing this renaissance is really, really something. And so I guess in my own way, by creating these SDKs for these games like BIONICLE Heroes, by pushing ahead on things like Remix with NVIDIA, I'm trying to make sure that we never go back to those dark days where modding feels like an underground thing that no one really respects, and where companies will just sort of copyright strike anyone who makes anything for their games. I'm trying to use my position and the skills and the passion that I have to make it so that all of these creative modders who I've been working with for more than a decade now, some people, all of these people will always be able to have that option to express their creativity in this way. And so I guess that's kind of what I mean. I am trying to create this empire that is not really an empire. It's for everyone, right? It's for everyone to feel free to mod all of these things. I don't claim to be singularly responsible, because that would be severely arrogant and a lot of hubris. It's a collective effort by some of the people I've mentioned in this interview, like Corey for Empire at War. The things he has done for that modding community are incredible, and I don't think enough people realize that Empire at War would not be anywhere near as moddable as it was without Corey. And there's a lot of individual stories like that. There's another guy named Kekulus who does a fantastic stuff with Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War, and these are all amazing people that I've met, and I've been trying to build connections with these guys and bring together these groups. And like I say, the goal is to make it so there will never be dark times ahead ever again for this community, but we can always have something to revisit together.
Nice. And somewhat related, if anyone wanted to get into modding, whether it's BIONICLE Heroes or other games, would you have any suggestions for them?
Yeah, I mean, with the BIONICLE Heroes modding SDK, this is about the best time possible to get into modding this game, and I would say it's even fairly easy now with the SDK. But any game that has a modding SDK is a good place to start. I generally think that modding source engine is still one of the best things you can do in 2026. Even though the engine is very old, there's such a wealth of information and documentation that you're pretty much, that although there will be times you'll be lost when you're a very advanced user, as a beginner, there's kind of nothing that isn't already documented very well somewhere. I think that's generally generally a safe bet. But yeah, I mean, any game that has an SDK, and certainly any game that comes with level editing tools and that sort of thing, is a great place to start.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's all I have to ask. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview.
Thank you so much for having me, Sophie. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been really interesting discussing, like, just throughout the years how, for specifically BIONICLE Heroes, modding went from just having to use a hex editor and just editing individual bytes to just now having a full-on SDK, which just makes it so much more accessible to just anyone.
Yeah, I mean, that's my dream, right? My dream is just that anyone who fancies it could just mod this game, or mod any game. Whenever I've made weird little mods for these games, I've always tried to document to some extent what I did and how I did it, so that in theory someone could follow and make something themselves. Because yeah, I mean, that's the best way to go. We all win when we're all modding together.
I highly recommend checking out all of Kralich's works, whether his many mods for BIONICLE Heroes, the various RTX projects he's contributed to, and especially everything that's been revealed as part of BIONICLE Day, from Metro Heroes to the 3.0 update from its Voya Nui, or even the BIONICLE Heroes modding SDK, all of which will be linked in the description.